Hello and welcome to my channel. So I'm going to start at the top and work my way down. So we've got Bruce the COVID poo, we got Cal, we got Liz. Hello, Liz. Princess Jax and the Fox. Yes, we've got weather warnings as well, storm warnings. So there has been some flooding. I need to apologise because I didn't stream yesterday. I forgot. I actually had been yesterday was the first time my family had actually been together. The first time my family had been together in months, and so we spent the whole day, and I was really tired and I fell asleep. So I apologise for that. I know, very, very naughty of me, hey? But anyway, it was good to catch up with my family, whom I haven't seen for months and months and months due to lockdown. Apology accepted. Thank you, Cal. So look, I've got a few interesting things today. I don't really have a lot there because there's not been a lot happen, but I found a couple of interesting articles, and there's oh, thank you, the Fox. Yes, I mean, I'd like to say that I was partying my end of assignments, but I haven't even started that yet. I'm too tired. I want to start with this one. And today the health minister admitted that vaccinations won't be available to under 12s until 2022. And I was wondering what you thought this meant for Australia. We have seen the effect delays have had on the vaccinations getting to Australians. But now we've got children involved, and we know that children are now in the vulnerable. So there are so many schools that are currently closed at the moment, and so many teachers and students that are isolating because COVID is running rampant in the schools. But according to the Health Minister, under 12s won't receive their first COVID vaccination jab until early next year. And the government has no plans to change the definition of fully vaccinated for older Australians to include a booster shot, the Health Minister says. So it sounds like they're not even bothering with the booster shot, which bothers me as well. So children aged between 5 and 11 will not be able to access a vaccine until at least early 2022, arguing the federal government saw no reason to rush the program. Small doses of Pfizer mRNA vaccine have been recommended for under 12s, meaning Australia has had to order new batches, which contains the correct dosages. That's those 5M doses unexpected to arrive until at least January. At this stage, to the best of my knowledge, only the United States has provided an emergency approval for children aged 5 to 11. And our medical regulator, the TGA, and technical advisory group, led by Victorian Principal Vaccines Advisor to the Premier, Professor Ellen Cheng, said they do not want to cut corners on the study and data for children, the Health Minister said. Oh, Australia, yes, because we didn't get the vaccines out quickly. Hunt said the rollout for children was ready to go when our regulators are convinced it's safe and effective. A third dose of the vaccine for older Australians 6 months after the second dose was administered has been recommended to cover any waning in vaccines effectiveness. Australia initially rolled out third doses or boosters for people with compromised immune systems. The program was recently expanded to include those due for a top-up. Our medical advice is that booster shots are just that. They're an important booster, Hunt said on Sunday. They add the capacity of an individual to have immunity and have a strong immune response. We've been one of those to start the whole of nation booster programs, one of the first after Israel. We've already reached 250,000 boosters only a week into the full program, and we're at 275,000 boosters at this point. But there's no plans to change the definition of fully vaccinated against COVID to include a booster shot. Now, to me, if you're fully vaccinated, that means you've got the booster shot. So against COVID to include a booster shot, including aged care workers, because people aren't going to get the booster shot, and guess what? This time next year, we're going to be having the same arguments. Hunt said the third vaccine was recommended, but there would be no change to existing advice. Everything is always under review, but there's no plans to change that requirement at that stage. As we've done throughout, we'll continue to follow the medical advice. That's That's how we've had one of the lowest rates of loss of life in the world, one of the highest rates of vaccination, and now one of the earliest whole-of-nation booster programs. Why are you taking credit for it, Mr. Hunt? While the over 16 Australian population as a whole has reached a double dose vaccination rate of just over 80%, Indigenous Australians have not received vaccinations at the same rate, with just 55% of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Australians having received 2 shots. Hunt on Sunday dodged a question on whether it was safe to open borders while Indigenous vaccination rates remained lower than the general population. Well, it is important that we open these borders, and the Doherty Institute modelling has shown these state figures help protect everybody, he said. But we want every individual to come forward, Indigenous and non-Indigenous. Hunt also pushed for Western Australia to open its border to the rest of Australia as soon as possible. WA is about to reach 70% double dose threshold, but the Premier, Mark McGowan, has previously said he won't open the state until it reaches 90%. Which is not expected until 2022. The 5th Ashes cricket test is scheduled in Perth in January, with players subject to just 5 days quarantine so the match can go ahead. Hunt said all Australians should be able to travel to WA. I want to not just see cricket, but children reuniting with parents, he said on Sunday. I want the same rules for children and cancer and cardiac patients as for cricketers, and to do that as quickly as possible. So, this is my concern. If you've been fully vaccinated, doesn't mean that you've had your booster. We're missing a step. And it's going to give us a lot of trouble, in my opinion. And if the government hadn't sat on their hands, we probably wouldn't have had what we had in Victoria and New South Wales. But it looks like they're sitting on their hands for kids. I understand that the TGA wants to see what's happening in the US. I understand that. But you can't be sitting on. You can't be sitting on your hand. You can't be sitting on your hands regarding this. So you probably heard something about Singapore. Well, Singapore. Yes, apparently so, after 6 months. Okay, so Singapore's warning to Australia as COVID-19 cases soar despite high vaccination. Singapore has a very been close to us, but it's been more than a month since New South Wales came out of lockdown and several weeks since Victoria did the same. Yet the predicted surge of COVID-19 cases has failed to occur. Indeed, in both states, daily numbers have barely budged or even trended downwards. I mean, Victoria did have a big surge down today, but a health expert has said Australia's COVID case honeymoon could be short-lived, and we only have to look at Singapore to see cases will inevitably rise once more. I think it's a matter of when the surge happens. Some epidemiologists think the rise is already occurring. On Saturday, Victoria announced 1,221 new local cases, and New South Wales saw 250 cases. For Victoria, that was 100 more than Friday, but the trend downwards continues in a state that was seeing more than 2,000 a month ago. 250 cases north of the Murray is the lowest for 4 days, but is still higher than the 129 cases on the 31st of October. Yet in Singapore, a country of 5.6 million, about 1 million fewer than Victoria, cases have soared since it memorably declared it would learn to live with COVID. On Friday, Singapore saw 3,099 cases and 14 deaths, although it is down from 5,300 late in October. The country started easing restrictions in August, with the surge beginning in September, when around 2/3 of its population was double vaxxed. Talking to ABC News, infectious disease expert Professor Dale Fisher of Singapore's National University said the country's experience should be a sobering lesson for Australia. I think you'll get a bit of a sunny summer honeymoon because people open the doors, windows, go outside for picnics. My concern in Australia would be more about March to April as you're going back into winter. There are several warnings Singapore could provide to Australia, he said. One is waning immunity, which globally is leading to spikes in cases, even though vaccinations are still providing good protection against hospitalisations and death. Singapore is now administering booster shots to help raise in the case numbers. Another reason for Singapore's post-lockdown surge could actually work in Australia's favour. A small but significant chunk of older Singaporeans have not got their jabs. Figures from the country's health ministry show that while 95% of people aged 20 to 70 have had both doses, that drops 86% to those over 80. This is not the case in Australia. Department of Health data shows that 94% of 80 to 85-year-olds in Australia have had both shots. The figure remains above 90% for all but over 95s. The stubborn cohort of the unvaccinated is one of the reasons the Singaporean government made the controversial decision to make those without their 2 shots pay their own hospital bill. Remember we discussed that the other day? That they're saying if you're not vaccinated, you're going to have to pay your bill. What Singapore and Australia do share, however, is that they are both nations where there has been very little COVID in the community, and that means vaccines are having to do all that hard yards in combating the virus. Singapore's COVID Minister, Lawrence Wong, said these countries were COVID naive. Unlike many European countries, we've kept infections in Singapore low for a very long time. Now they have a much higher level of natural immunity, and together with the vaccination programs they have introduced, many of these countries have reached a new COVID stable situation. Mr. Wong has warned Singaporeans that sooner or later most will end up catching COVID, and that further surges could occur. Associate Professor of the National University of Singapore, Saw See Hock School of Public Health, told Fortune magazine in October that the curse of countries like Singapore and Australia, which both essentially have kept COVID at bay, is that letting down the drawbridge will lead in spikes in cases. Countries that reopen from zero COVID to living with the endemic COVID, you have to expect massive numbers of cases, and a small proportion will die. It's just the nature of the virus. It's a horrendously difficult message to communicate politically, Professor Lim said. Nonetheless, like in other highly vaccinated countries, deaths in Singapore as a proportion of cases are far lower than they otherwise would be without vaccinations. Around 2% of COVID cases ultimately lead to fatality in Singapore. Of those who died, 72% were not fully vaccinated. After the country declared earlier it would live with COVID, it hasn't exactly lived up to its bold claim of no longer focusing on cases. Restrictions have seesawed in the city as cases have surged and waned. An easing of restrictions last week allowed 5 members of the same family to dine together, still stricter than Australia. But the country's government is determined to gradually loosen the rules and allow more overseas travellers in, COVID or no COVID. Lockdowns, for instance, are increasingly out of the question. So it's interesting because Singapore will actually will have restrictions, and then they will loosen them. So they keep to having restrictions, but they've been able to stay away from lockdowns. Some COVID watchers in Australia have warned the rising cases could now be on in New South Wales and Victoria. Speaking to news.com.au last week, University of South Australia epidemiologist Adrian Easterman said the reproductive number, REF, for New South Wales was hovering around 1, meaning each person with COVID was passing on to one other person on average. As soon as the REF goes above 1, cases are rising. It looks like a gentle rise, but it may be speeding up in a bit. We were pretty sure that when restrictions were relaxed, we would see more case numbers. We're more surprised they didn't come quicker. With the rising numbers now sets up the states for a COVID Christmas, with cases potentially surging during the holiday season as families gather to celebrate. The lesson from Singapore is that COVID honeymoon could be brief in Australia. Professor Fisher said the advice from Singapore was clear. People shouldn't take for granted that COVID was gone. The country should remain cautious around dropping all restrictions, particularly when winter arrives, and people should get their booster shots when it's time. I think it's a risk. Everyone is obviously sick of the pandemic and wants it over, but that would be my major warning. Now, this is the problem that, my whole problem is they what I keep seeing is that they're saying we're going to, COVID, once we're vaxxed, everything's going to be all right. Everything's going to be all right. Everything's not going to be all right. Look at Israel. Look at all the countries with high vaccination rates. COVID still exists. People are still going to get sick. It's not something that you can snap your fingers and make disappear. And that's my concern. So, anyway. So we're still going to keep on this, oh no, we're talking about Rona. So, help me, Rona, help me, Rona. Now, sports people have been told that if they don't get the jabs, they're not eligible to play. There was in the supercars, there was a driver that had a medical exemption that wasn't accepted. Apparently the doctor's now under investigation. He actually has been suspended till he gets his 2 shots. And we've had a Australian rules footballer announce their retirement because it came out that they had... he's announced his retirement after reportedly refusing a vaccination. So he didn't want to get vaccinated. They were looking at what their options were, whether they needed to sack him, but he's decided to retire. So he's announced his retirement from AFL after reportedly refusing to have the COVID-19 vaccination. The Blues released a media statement on Sunday afternoon confirming Jones's retirement without referencing his vaccination status. The club said it had been in regular contact with him during the off-season in a bid to provide appropriate support for the 30-year-old. Jones said he made the decision for personal reasons. I wish to announce my retirement from AFL football effective immediately. I'd like to take this opportunity to thank all who have supported me throughout my journey, both personally and professionally. I love the game and I'll miss my teammates. I hope that people respect my decision on privacy. Neither myself nor my management team will be making any further comment on the matter. Blues head of football Brad Lloyd said the club respected his decision. We've been in constant dialogue with Liam in recent months and allowing him the time he needed to make an informed decision regarding his playing career. He confirmed with us today that he'd made the decision to retire and his wish for the specific reasons of that decision be kept private. As a club, we will be respecting that. So he's 30 years old, which is still fairly young. So for Victorian AFL and AFLW players and football staff, the first stage of the policy requires them to be fully vaccinated by November 26 if they attend their clubs or to continue their pre-season training. The component of the policy falls in line with the Victorian government's authorised worker vaccination mandate. The last AFL deadline for vaccinations is February 18. Under the AFL policy, a player will be sacked on May 18 next year, but there are several options open to the club before taking this step. The Adelaide Crows announced earlier this month two-time AFLW Premiership defender Denny would go onto their inactive list because she would not have her COVID. So, what do you think? Should they be made to retire? Does it matter if one person's not vaccinated? I don't know. With one person is vaccinated and not the vaccinated is 20 they get. I mean, he probably had another couple of seasons in him. He probably had another few seasons in him, a couple more seasons, but I don't know. Definitely an interesting. It is definitely an interesting. And the drugs they were taking, yeah. Well, that was interesting too, wasn't it? Sorry, not sorry. Yeah. All right, we're going to flick over to the UK now. Matt Hancock, the Barnaby Joyce of the UK. Remember, this is the guy that was caught having a relationship with a staffer, and when there was supposed to be no contact or something at work, and he was found having contact with work. So Matt Hancock has been approached about writing a book about his experience as health secretary during the coronavirus pandemic, his spokesperson has confirmed, provoking anger from campaigners and the Labor Party. The former minister, who stepped down in June, after it revealed he had broken COVID restrictions, had been contacted, but no deal had been made. So yes, he broke COVID restrictions having an affair. So Chaotic Dan says, we're hitting the percentages. I don't see why isn't actual immunity from previous exposure meaning anything? Hi. No, they haven't brought in a bonk ban. They need to. So yes, so he was caught breaking COVID restrictions when he was going OTS over the side with a staffer. Reports that Hancock was considering a lucrative deal ahead of next year's inquiry drew harsh condemnation from the opposition. Labor's deputy leader, Angela Rayner, said the former health secretary was attempting to push his spin on the government's failures. She tweeted, "This is disgusting and an insult to each and every bereaved family." Boris Johnson needs to step in and block Matt Hancock from getting a bumper payday and put his spin on government's failures before we get the truth in a public inquiry. In a separate Labor statement, a Labor spokesperson said the Cabinet Office should block the publication of this tasteless as a tasteless cashing in on tragedy. The COVID-19 Bereaved Families for Justice UK group also condemned Hancock as trying to cash in on the pandemic. Politician trying to cash in on the pandemic, eh? Which has resulted in more than 142,000 deaths in the UK, according to government figures. The fact that Matt Hancock thinks it's appropriate for bereaved families to have to listen to his spin on their loved one's death before the truth comes out via the inquiry says it all. But the attitude of the man who oversaw the worst UK public health failure ever, the group which has led calls for an inquiry into the government's handling of the coronavirus pandemic, wrote on Twitter. The fact that Matt Hancock thinks it's appropriate for bereaved families to have to listen to his spin on their loved one's death before the truth has come out via the inquiry says it all about the attitude of the man who oversaw the worst UK public health failure ever. The inquiry is likely to examine whether the government was quick enough to apply restrictions to protect the public from the virus and look at whether care homes were properly protected. Hancock spoke about throwing a protective ring around care homes during the early stages of the pandemic in England, but the country went on to record tens of thousands of care home deaths. The Daily Mail first reported that the former minister was in talks with HarperCollins about writing an insider account of the government's pandemic response, claiming the publisher could hand him an advance of £100,000. Hancock confirmed reports that he'd been approached, telling the newspaper that no decision had been made. His spokesperson, similarly, underlined on Saturday that while an approach has been made, no deal has been signed. Matt has been approached to write a book about his experiences in the pandemic, but no decisions have been made. There is no deal. And publisher HarperCollins said on Saturday evening it was not in talks with Hancock and had no knowledge of any book about his pandemic experience. "We have no knowledge of such book and are not in talks," it said in a tweet. The Daily Mail reported that Hancock was set to write How I Won the COVID War book on his heroic role in the UK vaccine campaign. But responding to the claim, Hancock's spokesperson said the people who were heroic during the pandemic were the NHS staff who worked around the clock to save lives. While the official government figures on Friday put the UK's death toll at 142,678. Separate statistics show there have been 165,534 deaths where COVID is mentioned on the death certificate. I like that. How I won the COVID war. Is he going to talk about how he broke COVID restrictions? So, I mean, you can still get measles. You just don't get it as bad. Isn't it? I had the mumps, and I have been vaccinated. Okay. We're going to cross now to the Independent Australia, who has got an article called The Kings of Defamation. Who do you think the Kings of Defamation are? Porter, Laming, Barilaro, Dutton. DLE lawyers, defamation law experts ask us about group discounts. Is that a Van Olsen as well? Is that supposed to be Van Olsen? In a string of defamation lawsuits, coalition MPs Barilaro, Dutton, Porter and Laming and others have let loose on citizens to suppress loose tongues, writes the managing editor. Hardly a day goes by when one parliamentarian or another doesn't bully a private citizen into submission. While happy to ensure the safeguards of parliamentary privilege, launching defamation lawsuits against private citizens, members of the media, or even comedians for daring to hold them to scrutiny is now de rigueur for politicians and their privileged mates. In a string of defamation proceedings, coalition MPs Barilaro, Dutton, Porter, Laming, and News Corp journalist Peter Van Olsen have let loose on members of the public to contain any potential loose tongues and shut down any future scrutiny of their alleged unsavoury activities or those of their mates. I agree. The Fox, if they want to sue somebody, they give up parliamentary privilege. I agree. This week, former New South Wales Deputy Premier John Call Me Pork Barilaro withdrew his defamation suit against friendly Geordie's Jordan Shanks after wreaking havoc against the YouTuber for satirising the then Deputy Premier's litany of blatant and self-acknowledged pork barrelling. Barilaro finally walked away from the lawsuit. It may be that following his resignation from Parliament, Barilaro's influence is considerably weakened, or it may be that his upcoming ICAC appearance would put paid to any claims of slander on his part. We may never know. In a media statement, lawyer for Shanks, Mark Davis of Xenophon Davis, said our client will not be paying a cent in damages to Mr. Barilaro. Not one video will be taken down. Shanks did apologise for any offence to Barilaro, and it is possible that the politician was offended. But surely a little satire is expected when one enters Parliament. After all, it is becoming increasingly difficult to determine whether some politicians' actions are fact or parody. If you think about, there was a show on the radio called How Green Was My Cactus, and they used to satirise Parliament. That was so funny. Kings of defamation, online stalking, and taking offence. It's been a busy week for bruised egos. Former Chief Law Officer of the Land, Christian Porter, has lodged yet another defamation lawsuit. And why not? Money is obviously no object when one has a secret blind trust funding one's legal proclivities and belongs to a government that ensures there will be no inquiry into the alleged behaviour or secret blind trust. Porter, while Attorney General, claimed he would be reviewing our defamation laws, which are too easily manipulated, making Australia the defamation capital of the world, and described them as no longer fit for purpose. But that was then. With Porter later the subject of scrutiny over historic allegations, it was straight to the courts to demand litigation. And whilst on mental health leave, Porter still managed to undertake legal proceedings against the national broadcaster and journalist Louise Milligan for daring to do their job and report on the matter, despite never naming Porter in the article in question. These charges were later dropped, with the former Attorney General bizarrely claiming victory anyway. And in a way, the action was victory of sorts, since it succeeded in preventing the ABC from commenting further and deterred others from publishing anything for which they may face similar threats. In the meantime, the Morrison government also used Parliament to shut down any inquiry into the allegations in Parliament. Being in Parliament does come in handy. Now, aggrieved once again and armed with the moral support of fellow MP Andrew Laming, the one who made a habit of stalking women on Facebook, and mate and journalist Peter Van Alsten, who frequently takes offence at everything, Porter has launched a new action, this time against Professor Gemma Carey, a disabled child SA survivor and expectant mother. Carey received 3 separate legal proceeding notices in one email from lawyer Rebecca Giles on behalf of Porter, Van Alsten, and Andrew Laming, all from the same lawyer Porter used during his attempt to sue Louise Milligan and the ABC. The defamation action involves a comment tweeted by Carey about Van Alsten and Porter and a separate tweet concerning Laming. Carey has now deleted the tweets and apologised online to all 3 men. Despite the notices being sent to Carey simultaneously from the same law firm, Van Alsten tweeted, "I was not in any way, shape or form associated with anyone else. I am the victim here, as is my wife, of defamatory comments now apologise for. We had zero to do with any coordination." Really? Australian of the Year Grace Tame once again led the charge in defence of the true victims, tweeting a detailed thread, including the following: "This coordinated attack clearly had a design, and I think it was not just to silence one individual, but rather to have a wide deterrent effect on others contemplating speaking out. I see it as a form of systemic abuse, whereby legislation is weaponised to strategically silence those with less access to power and resources." Then there's the Minister for Defence, Mr. Potato Head, Peter Dutton. The man who locked up asylum seekers and all but threw away the key is now suing refugee activist Shane Bazzi. Bazzi labelled Dutton our apologist after the minister said he was not aware of the she said, he said details in the Brittany Higgins Parliament House R case. Dutton said Bazzi's tweet went against who I am, my beliefs. This went to a different level. It appears ludicrous that the coalition, self-proclaimed party of free speech, is simultaneously trying to amend religious discrimination laws to allow discrimination on the basis of race, colour or national or ethnic origin, and also suing its own citizens whenever it is criticised or held to account. These lawsuits are not about people being unfairly treated. They are political tactics, and to that end, they have been very successful so far. They distract us, silence dissenters, dissuade possible future scrutiny, and create a false narrative that focuses attention on the wrong victims. Grace Tame was referring to Porter, Van Alsten and Laming in the following tweet, but its application is far wider. If this type of behaviour is allowed to continue, it will have chilling effect of reversing the roles of victim and offender, erasing the truth and ultimately perpetuating the cycle of abuse. These actions of these 3 cowards is exploitative. Take advantage of that power imbalance and weaponise it for personal gain. In this system, there is no equality of arms. The wealthy are the privileged. And then this is her last Wednesday. Christian Porter, Andrew Laming, Peter Van Alsten sent simultaneous defamation threats to also Gemma Carey. She's disabled and expectant mother and also a survivor of child SA. So a GoFundMe has been set up for Professor Carey and others facing defamation from Porter, Van Alsten and Laming. So does our government suffer from hurt feelings? I mean, probably Mr. Dutton's going to sue me now because I called him Mr. Potato Head. Uh-oh. I'll be in trouble, eh? But it's a real worry. And of course, we know why the federal government doesn't want a federal ICAC, don't we? Because they'll all be done for corruption, in my opinion. Don't take that as fact. All right. Well, if you thought that was interesting, have a look at this story. This is reported by True Crime Weekly. This is quite shocking. A principal calls police on a grandpa over a peaceful petition. So a grandfather had the police called on him. Hello, totally clueless. So principal calls police on grandpa over peaceful petition. Cops pay Western Sydney granddad a visit over his concerns about granddaughter's bizarre school hours. In the sign of the times, there has emerged yet more worrying evidence that Australia is sliding down a slippery slope into becoming a dangerous police state, with a Western Sydney granddad paid a visit at his home by New South Wales police, who insinuated that he was a pedophile for simply creating a petition about the bizarre school hours of the local primary school of his beloved granddaughter will attend next year. Steve Yukel is a devoted grandfather who lives in the Western Sydney suburb of Marylands. What happened to him last month at the heavy-handedness of the New South Wales Department of Education and New South Wales Police should concern all Australians. His 5-year-old granddaughter is due to commence kindergarten at Marylands East Primary School next year. However, Marylands East Primary School has different school hours to other schools in the local area, with schools starting at 8 a.m. and finishing at 1:15 p.m. Mr. Yukel's daughter-in-law suffers from migraines, and her condition means she's unable to get up early enough to transport Mr. Yukel's granddaughter to school by 8 a.m. When he contacted Marylands East Primary School on his daughter-in-law's behalf to raise these concerns, the school told him there was nothing that could be done about changing the school hours, and his expressed concerns fell on deaf ears. He then contacted numerous bureaucrats at multiple levels within the New South Wales Department of Education, asking for an explanation why Marylands East Primary School had different school hours to other schools. But again, his request was met with stony-walled silence. The school told me there was nothing they could do about it, and the education told me that other schools in the area had no capacity to take my granddaughter, despite the fact that the medical issues constitute a special consideration in those schools' enrolment criteria. At his wit's end and at being ignored by New South Wales Department of Education bureaucrats, he told the school principal, Mr. John Goh, and the Education Minister's office that he intended to conduct a petition about the school hours outside the gates of Marylands East Public School in late October. Again, his communication fell on deaf ears, and he got no response from the school or the minister's office. I then decided to kick up a stink and conduct a peaceful petition outside the school because I was being ignored at every level. So he actually already told them what he was going to do. On the afternoon of the 21st of October 2021, Mr. Yukel positioned himself outside the main school gate on public property where parents collected their children with a petition that asked parents whether or not they were happy with the school hours. The school principal, Mr. John Goh, approached him from inside the school grounds and told him in no uncertain terms that he knew what Mr. Yukel was trying to do and he was not allowed to force parents to sign a petition. But the guy was on public, he wasn't even on school land. True Crime News Weekly has spoken to several parents who were present outside the school at the time and who said Mr. Yukel interacted kindly, peacefully and respectfully with all parents that he engaged with. And at no time did he try to harass anybody into signing his petition. He almost gained a dozen signatures in support of his petition. Several parents of children at the school also voiced their discontent with the school's operating hours, but told True Crime News Weekly they were afraid to complain to the school about the hours because they feared retribution from the principal. The day after conducting his peaceful petition, Mr. Yukel was taking a nap at home when he was awoken to two New South Wales police officers knocking on his door. The officers asked him if he'd been at Maryland's East Public School the day before, and he told them that they had received a complaint from the school and that he had been harassing people outside the school grounds. Shocked and taken aback by the accusation, Mr. Yukel told the officers that he'd been peacefully conducting a petition outside the school on public property, to which one of the police officers responded, "You're a middle-aged man, and that is not a good look for you to be out the front of a school." The comments stunned him. Here were two police officers at his own home insinuating that his actions in peacefully carrying out a petition could be construed as conduct akin to that of a dangerous pedophile or a person intent on grooming children for SA. True Crimes News Weekly contacted New South Wales Police and asked them for an explanation for this seemingly disgraceful police conduct, but no response was required. The police did not charge Mr. Yukel, nor were they able to provide him with any clear guidelines or advice about what is acceptable conduct when conducting a petition on public property out the front of the school. The entire interaction with police left him feeling completely humiliated. By having the cops called on him, it seems the school and the police completely overstepped their mark in their response to Mr. Yukel's peaceful petition. His petition was conducted on public property, not inside the school grounds, so the school and the police had no right to impose the force of law on him. I don't know if it was the fixated persons unit. The school also included information in the school's newsletter to parents in reference to Mr. Yukel, telling them that there was a strange man hanging around the school and not to approach him. Not only was this inaccurate, Mr. Yukel never stepped foot inside the school grounds. It is also defamatory, just like the insinuations of the police officers sent to harass Mr. Yukel at his home. When asked why the school phoned the police on Mr. Yukel, a New South Wales Department of Education spokesperson provided a vague and dubious response. With COVID restrictions in place, the school contacted the police to make them aware of the activity that would be taking place outside the school, a spokesperson told True Crime News Weekly. New South Wales Education Minister Sarah Mitchell was also contacted to seek comment for this story, but we did not receive a response. Instead of engaging Mr. Yukel and trying to address his concerns, the school attempted to intimidate and frighten him into remaining silent by setting the cops onto him. Setting the cops on a child's grandfather for carrying out a peaceful petition on public property outside school grounds would be, for many right-minded people, be completely and utterly overstepping the mark. But that's exactly what happened. Mr. Yukel is simply a devoted grandfather with an honest concern, but this was the way he was treated by Maryland's East Primary School, and the police was like he was an out-of-control vigilante. Rather than being respected and applauded for peacefully advocating for his granddaughter, it seems authorities instead treated him like some sort of criminal and tried to frighten his poor grandfather into submission. But it will take more than one police intimidation and harassment to prevent Mr. Yukel from telling his truth. Mr. Yukel's experience is by no means unique or rare, as there is more and more evidence coming to light that this sort of abuse of power is becoming an increasingly and worrying common occurrence in everyday Australian life. Police are regularly overstepping the mark and encroaching themselves on everyday Australians for exercising their basic democratic rights and civil liberties. People need to be made aware of such abuses of power by authorities every day, that everyday Australians, such as grandparents like Mr. Yukel, are subject to. Otherwise, our society will slide further down the dangerous, insidious and slippery slope towards becoming a totalitarian police state. So what do you reckon about that? I mean, the guy even said, I'm going to set up a petition. He told them. They could have said not to, please don't do that, but they didn't. Instead, they let him do it and then rang the police, called the police on him. And he was on public property. What are your thoughts on that? Yeah. I don't know how much is left in the legal fund. I don't know. That's never been stated. Well, I think that's a look. Some people don't like being questioned, just do they? They go into this whole about 800K. Is it? I don't know. I've not seen anything to say how much is in that fund. Well, that's a really good question, Dan. Why? Why are the school hours different? That's a very good question. If they were truly worried, they would have called the police. Well, that's right. Why did they wait until the next day? Why did the police come the next day? Was it the fact that he was actually getting people on site? 8 o'clock is very early for kindergarten, for little kids to go to school. That's like horrifying. In my opinion, 8 o'clock is so early for little kids. I'd struggle to get my kids ready for 8 o'clock. We started at 7. Oh, wow. High short order cook. So that's my issue. Oh, wow. 6 a.m., Brendan. Definitely very interesting, isn't it? Well, I mean, that's the thing. You're going to teach kids how to question authority, aren't you? Oh, we just talked about a grandfather that had the police called on him because he had set up a petition outside the school grounds about the school hours. They said it didn't look good that he was outside the school ground, and implied that he may be, and stated it could be implied that he could be something else. It's rather uncomfortable particularly when they're right. Oh, worse when they're right. Hey. All right. Well, Wilber Smith, internationally acclaimed author, he passed away in South Africa. He was 88 years old. He was 88. So he was Zambia born. Wilber Smith has died in South Africa aged 88, his publisher announced. Global best-selling author Wilber Smith died unexpectedly this afternoon at his Cape Town home after a morning of reading and writing with his wife Niso by his side, said a statement released on Wilber Smith's website. With 49 titles under his belt since his first novel, When the Line Feeds, was published in 1964, Smith has become a household name in literature. The undisputed and inimitable master of adventure writing, Wilber Smith's novels have grappled readers for over half a century, selling over 140 million copies worldwide in more than 30 languages. His best-selling Courtney series was the longest running in publishing history, said the statement. It spanned generations and 3 centuries through critical periods from the dawn of colonial Africa to the American Civil War to the apartheid era in South Africa. In the 49 novels Smith published to date, he has transported his readers to gold mines in South Africa, piracy in the Indian Ocean, buried treasure on tropical islands, conflict in Arabia and Khartoum, ancient Egypt, World War II Germany and Paris, India, the Americans, and the Antarctic. Encountering ruthless diamond and slave traders and big game hunters in the jungles and the bush of African wilderness. But it was with Tatia, the hero of his Egyptian series, that Wilber most strongly identified, and River God remains one of his best-loved novels to this day, said the statement. His office thanked Smith's millions of fans across the world who cherished his incredible writing and joined us all for his amazing vengeance. So there you go. Yeah. Well, sometimes they look, some of those titles I knew. I don't think I read them, but I knew of him. But I knew he was an author. I knew he was an internationally acclaimed author, and but I didn't know, much else. I think I'd seen River God, but like the book, but I'd never read it. Yeah. So that's about all I've got for you tonight, people. I'm really sorry it's a really short one. Thank you for joining me. Make sure that you hit like and subscribe and, all the YouTube thingies. I'll put timestamps up for everybody because I know we covered quite a bit. But yes, definitely. Now, I won't be on tomorrow. I actually have choir, so I won't be on tomorrow. So there'll be a night's break and then I'll be back again. All right. So thank you for joining me, and I will catch you again in 2 days' time. Bye for now.